Hello there, friends. I'm James Lioncourts, and I want to welcome you back to our channel, where we share the most touching, real-life family stories that remind us what truly matters in this world. Before we begin today's story, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. These stories come straight from the heart, and they're meant to inspire, heal, and bring families closer together. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful messages with families across America. Today, I'm going to tell you about Richard and Martha Williams from Dallas, Texas, and their two sons, William and Daniel. This is a story that will make you question everything you think you know about success, failure, and the dangerous trap of comparing our children. It's a story about money that was sent but never arrived, about assumptions that destroyed relationships, and about the incredible power of forgiveness to heal even the deepest wounds. So settle in, because this journey is going to take us through heartbreak, betrayal, shocking revelations, and ultimately, the beautiful redemption that can happen when a family chooses love over pride. The Williams family lived in a modest two-story house on Elm Street in Dallas, where the summer heat seemed to match the tension that often filled their dinner table. Richard Williams, a hard-working man in his late 50s, had spent 30 years as a supervisor at a local manufacturing plant. His wife Martha, a gentle woman with graying hair and worry lines that seemed to deepen each year, worked part-time at the neighborhood grocery store. They had raised two sons in that house. William, the older boy, had always been what folks would call the golden child. He graduated from the University of Texas with a business degree, landed a job at a prestigious firm in downtown Dallas, and drove a shiny BMW that caught the neighbors' attention every time he pulled into the driveway. Then there was Daniel, 2 years younger, who had taken a different path entirely. After high school, Daniel had tried community college, but dropped out after a semester. He bounced from job to job, never seeming to find his footing in the world that his parents understood. The contrast between the two brothers couldn't have been sharper. William wore crisp suits and talked about quarterly reports and business meetings. Daniel wore work boots and came home with dirt under his fingernails from whatever construction site or warehouse he was working at that week. And Richard and Martha, like so many parents before them, made a mistake that would echo through their family for years to come. They started comparing their sons, and in their minds, one was clearly winning while the other was falling behind. But sometimes, the story we think we see isn't the whole truth. Sometimes, the child we've written off as a failure is carrying burdens we never imagined, making sacrifices we never knew about, and showing a kind of love that goes far deeper than success or failure ever could. Sunday dinners at the Williams house had become a weekly reminder of disappointment. Martha would set the table with her best china, hoping that somehow the formal place settings might make the conversation more pleasant, but inevitably, the comparisons would begin. William got another promotion at work, Martha would announce proudly, passing around the mashed potatoes. His boss says he's the most dedicated young man they've ever had. Richard would nod approvingly, cutting into his roast beef. That's what happens when you apply yourself, when you make smart choices and stick with them. The words hung in the air like a judgment, and everyone knew they weren't really about William's success. They were about Daniel's perceived failures. Daniel would sit there quietly, pushing food around on his plate, his calloused hands a stark contrast to William's smooth, manicured fingers. He'd learned long ago that defending himself only made things worse. Any explanation he offered was seen as an excuse. Any achievement he mentioned was dismissed as too little, too late. Daniel, when are you going to settle down and find a real career? His father would ask, the same question that had been asked 100 times before. You're 28 years old. William already owns his own condo and has money in the bank. I'm working, Dad, Daniel would reply quietly. I'm doing my best. Your best. Richard would shake his head. Son, if this is your best, then you need to try harder. Look at your brother. Look at what focus and determination can accomplish. Martha would sometimes try to soften the blow. Your father just wants what's best for you, honey. We both do. We just worry about your future. But her worry felt like disappointment, and her concern felt like criticism. Daniel had grown up feeling like he was always falling short, always being measured against a standard he could never meet. What his parents didn't know was that Daniel had found his own way of showing love for his family. What they couldn't see was the sacrifice he was making, month after month, year after year. While they were comparing him to his brother, Daniel was quietly trying to prove his worth in the only way he knew how. Every morning at 5:30, Daniel's alarm would cut through the darkness of his small studio apartment on the other side of town. While most people were still dreaming, Daniel was already pulling on his work boots, grabbing his lunch pail, and heading out to his first job of the day. He worked construction from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, hauling materials, mixing concrete, and learning the trade from men who had been building houses since before Daniel was born. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it paid decent money for a man without a college degree. But Daniel didn't stop there. At 3 o'clock, after a quick shower and a change of clothes, he'd drive across town to his second job at a loading dock, where he'd spend the evening moving boxes and freight until nearly midnight. 2 jobs, 16-hour days, 7 days. A week, his hands were permanently stained with dirt and calluses. His back ached constantly. His social life was non-existent. But Daniel had a reason for pushing himself so hard, a secret that he kept close to his heart. Every month, without fail, Daniel would take $500 from his hard-earned paychecks and send it home to his parents. $500 that represented overtime hours and skipped meals, sacrifices that his family would never see or understand. He'd write a simple note with each money order, for Mom and Dad, with love. Hope this helps with the bills. Daniel, in his mind, this money was his way of proving that he wasn't the failure his parents thought he was. This was his contribution to the family, his way of showing that even though he didn't have William's fancy degree or prestigious job, he still cared about the people who had raised him. Daniel imagined his parents' surprise and gratitude when they received that first envelope. He pictured his father's face softening with pride, his mother's eyes filling with tears of appreciation. He imagined them finally seeing that their younger son had value, that he was trying to help in his own way. Month after month, for 3 long years, Daniel sent that money home. $500 became $1,500, then $3,000, then more. By his calculations, he had sent nearly $20,000 to help his parents with their mortgage, their bills, their daily expenses. But something strange was happening. His parents never mentioned the money. They never called to thank him. They never acknowledged his sacrifice or his generosity. In fact, their criticism seemed to be getting worse, not better. Daniel began to wonder if the money was even reaching them. But surely it had to be. He was careful with the addresses, careful with the money orders. Someone was cashing them because they were being processed at the bank. What Daniel didn't know was that his gift of love was being stolen by the very person his parents held up as the model of success. Richard and Martha Williams lived modestly, but they weren't struggling financially. Richard's supervisor's salary and Martha's part-time income were enough to cover their mortgage, their bills, and their simple lifestyle. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't in need of financial help either. So when Daniel's money orders started arriving, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Richard Williams, no one thought to mention them to the elderly couple. After all, mail sometimes gets mixed up, and in a busy household, envelopes can be easily overlooked, especially when someone has a reason to make sure they stay overlooked. William had moved back in with his parents temporarily, or so he claimed, while he was between apartments. The truth was, his expensive lifestyle had caught up with him. The BMW payments, the designer clothes, the fancy dinners and weekend trips he posted about on social media. All of it was funded by credit cards that were now maxed out. The prestigious job he bragged about. He'd been let go 6 months earlier for poor performance, but he hadn't told his parents. Instead, he left the house each morning in his suit, spent the day at coffee shops and libraries, and came home with stories about his busy day at the office. When the first money order arrived addressed to his parents, William saw an opportunity. He recognized Daniel's handwriting on the envelope. He knew his brother was trying to help the family, probably feeling guilty about being such a disappointment. In William's mind, Daniel owed the family something anyway. After all, Daniel had caused their parents so much worry and frustration over the years. This money was probably Daniel's way of trying to make up for all the times he'd let everyone down. So, William cashed the money order, telling himself he'd mention it to his parents eventually. He'd just use it temporarily to get caught up on his bills, and then he'd pay it back before anyone noticed. But the money was so helpful, so necessary, for maintaining the lifestyle that kept his parents proud of him. And another envelope arrived the next month, and the next. Soon, William was depending on his brother's generosity to fund his deception. Daniel's $500 a month was keeping William's secret safe, allowing him to continue pretending to be the successful son, while his younger brother worked 2 jobs to support the lie. For 3 years, William cashed every money order. He used the money for car payments, credit card bills, and the expensive dinners he claimed his company was paying for. All the while, Richard and Martha continued to praise their successful older son and worry about their struggling younger one. The irony was devastating. Daniel was working himself to exhaustion to help his family, while William was stealing. That helped to maintain a facade of success. The son they praised was a fraud, and the son they criticized was a hero they didn't even know they had. But secrets have a way of coming to light, especially during the holidays when families gather, and truths have nowhere to hide. Christmas had always been Martha's favorite time of year. She loved the decorating, the cooking, the feeling of having her whole family together under one roof. This particular Christmas, she had outdone herself with the preparations. The tree stood tall in the corner of the living room, covered with ornaments collected over 30 years of marriage. The smell of ham and fresh-baked rolls filled the house. Christmas music played softly in the background, and Martha had even used her grandmother's crystal glasses for dinner. William had arrived early, bringing expensive wine and stories about his successful year at work. He hugged his parents warmly, complimented his mother's cooking, and helped his father carry in extra chairs from the garage. Daniel arrived just as the sun was setting, looking tired but trying to smile. He'd worked a half day at the construction site that morning. Christmas Eve or not, some jobs couldn't wait. His gift for his parents was modest, a framed photo of the family from happier times, but it was wrapped with care. The dinner conversation started pleasantly enough. Martha asked about everyone's plans for the new year. William talked about a possible promotion at work, a raise that might be coming his way. Richard shared stories about the old days, when the boys were young and Christmas morning was filled with bicycle assembly and toy wrapping paper. But as the evening wore on, the familiar patterns began to emerge. Richard started comparing the brothers, as he always did. Martha worried out loud about Daniel's future, as she always did. And Daniel sat quietly, taking it all in, as he always did. "You know, Daniel," Richard said, setting down his coffee cup with a deliberate clink, "your brother has really made something of himself. He's got job security, a good income, a bright future ahead of him." "Dad, please," Daniel said quietly. "It's Christmas." "That's exactly why I'm bringing it up," Richard continued. "Christmas is a time for family, for taking care of each other. And I worry that you're not in a position to take care of anyone, including yourself." Martha reached across the table and patted Daniel's hand. "We just want to see you settled, honey. We want to know that you'll be okay when we're gone." The words hit Daniel harder than usual, maybe because it was Christmas. Maybe because he was exhausted from working so hard. Or maybe because he had spent 3 years sending money home to parents who seemed to care more about his failures than his sacrifices. Something inside Daniel finally snapped. The quiet, patient son, who had endured years of criticism and comparison, suddenly found his voice. "You want to know if I can take care of people?" Daniel asked, his voice rising slightly. "You want to know if I'm capable of responsibility?" The room went quiet. Even the Christmas music seemed to fade into the background. Daniel looked around the table at the faces of his family. His father's stern expression, his mother's worried eyes, his brother's carefully neutral mask. For 3 years, he had kept his secret, hoping that someday his parents would see his worth without needing to know about his financial sacrifice. But their criticism tonight had been the final straw. Their concern about his inability to take care of anyone had cut too deep. It was time for the truth to come out. "I've been sending you money," Daniel said, his voice steady but emotional. "Every month for 3 years. $500 a month, from my paycheck to your mailbox." Richard and Martha stared at him in confusion. "What are you talking about, son?" Richard asked. "Money orders," Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. "Made out to Mr. and Mrs. Richard Williams, with notes telling you it was from me, telling you I hoped it would help with the bills." Martha's hand went to her throat. "Daniel, we haven't received any money from you." "That's impossible," Daniel said, pulling out his phone. "I have the receipts. I have the tracking numbers. Every money order has been cashed." He scrolled through his banking app, showing them the monthly transactions. $500 to Speedy money orders, every month, like clockwork. Nearly $20,000 over 3 years. "Someone has been cashing them," Daniel said, his voice beginning to shake with emotion. "Someone has been taking the money I've been sending to help you, to show you that I'm not the failure you think I am." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard and Martha looked at each other in shock, then at Daniel, then at the phone showing the evidence of his sacrifice. "Son, we never saw that money," Martha whispered, her eyes beginning to fill with tears. "We never knew, ... And that's when all eyes turned to William, who had gone very pale and very quiet in his chair at the end of the table. The golden child, the successful son, the one who had been held up as the example of what Daniel should become, suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "William," Richard's voice was sharp, demanding, "do you know anything about this?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. And in that moment, everyone in the room knew that Christmas dinner was about to become something none of them would ever forget. William's hands were shaking as he reached for his water glass. The room seemed to close in around him as 3 pairs of eyes waited for his answer. The Christmas tree lights that had seemed so cheerful just minutes before now felt harsh and accusing. Double quotes, William started, then stopped. He looked at Daniel, whose face showed a mixture of hurt and growing realization. He looked at his parents, whose confusion was quickly turning to suspicion. "William." Martha's voice was barely a whisper. "Tell us you don't know anything about this money." But William couldn't tell them that, because it would be a lie. And after 3 years of lies, 3 years of stolen money and stolen credit, the truth was finally demanding to be heard. "I can explain," William said, his voice cracking. "Explain what?" Richard's voice was growing louder, more demanding. "Explain what, son?" William looked down at his plate, at the Christmas dinner that had turned into his moment of reckoning. I've been getting the money orders." The words came out like a confession at trial. Quiet, but devastating. "You've been getting them?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You've been getting the money I've been sending to Mom and Dad?" "Yes, but I can explain. You've been stealing from them." Daniel stood up from his chair, his voice rising. You've been stealing the money I've been killing myself to send home." Martha's hand went to her mouth in shock. Richard's face was turning red with anger and confusion. "It's not stealing," William said desperately. "They're addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Williams, and I'm a Williams, and I was going to tell them, eventually, ... Tell us what?" Richard's voice was like thunder. "Tell us that you've been taking money meant for your mother and me. Money that your brother has been breaking his back to send us." The truth was spilling out now, and William couldn't stop it. "I lost my job 6 months ago. I've been pretending to go to work, but I got fired. The car payments, the apartment, everything ... I needed the money." Martha started crying then, soft tears that fell into her lap. Not just because of the stolen money, but because of what it all meant. The son they had praised was a thief and a liar. The son they had criticized was a hero they had never recognized. $20,000, Daniel said, his voice hollow with betrayal. $20,000 I've worked 2 jobs to send home, because I thought you needed help. Because I wanted to show you that I cared about this family. And we never knew," Martha whispered through her tears. "We never knew you were trying to help us." The weight of the revelation was crushing. Every comparison they had made, every criticism they had leveled at Daniel, every time they had held up William as the example of success, it had all been based on a lie. William sat in his chair, the golden child no more, watching his family's world collapse around the truth he had hidden for so long. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, but no one in the dining room seemed to hear it. The Christmas dinner sat growing cold on the table, forgotten in the wake of William's confession. Richard sat back in his chair like he'd been punched in the stomach. His face was pale, and he kept shaking his head as if he could somehow make the truth go away. Martha was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking with the weight of understanding. Every harsh word they'd spoken to Daniel, every time they'd worried about his future, while praising William's success, it had all been wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong. "Daniel," she whispered, reaching toward her younger son. "Oh, Daniel, what have we done?" But Daniel stepped back from the table, his face a mixture of hurt and anger and exhaustion that went far deeper than just physical tiredness. "What you've done," Daniel's voice was quiet but sharp. "What you've done is spend 3 years telling me I'm a failure, while he," Daniel pointed at William, "has been stealing the money I was sending to help you." "Son, we didn't know," Richard started. "You didn't know because you never bothered to see me," Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. "You never bothered to see that I was working 2 jobs, that I was trying to help, that I was doing everything I could to make you proud of me." William finally found his voice again. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I just needed some help, and I thought..." "You thought what?" Daniel turned on his brother with years of pent-up frustration. "You thought it was okay to steal from your own parents. You thought it was okay to let me work myself to death, while you took credit for money you never earned. I was going to pay it back," William said weakly. "With what money?" Daniel's voice was rising again. "You don't even have a job. You've been lying to everyone about everything." The family that had sat down to Christmas dinner as one unit was now fractured, possibly beyond repair. The golden child had fallen from grace, the struggling son had been revealed as a hero, and the parents were faced with the devastating realization that they had been wrong about both their children for years. Martha looked at Daniel with tears streaming down her face. "How do we fix this? How do we even begin to make this right?" But Daniel was already reaching for his coat. The weight of years of criticism, combined with the betrayal of discovering where his money had really gone, was too much to bear in that moment. "I need some air," he said quietly. "I need to think." And with that, he walked out the front door, leaving behind a Christmas dinner that would forever change the Williams family. Daniel drove through the empty streets of Dallas, Christmas lights blinking in windows and yards all around him, but he barely saw them. His mind was reeling with the revelations of the evening, trying to process 3 years of sacrifice that had been stolen, 3 years of criticism that had been undeserved. He found himself at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where truckers and shift workers grabbed coffee and pie when the rest of the world was asleep. The waitress, a kind-faced woman named Helen, who'd been working the night shift for 20 years, poured him coffee without asking and left him alone with his thoughts. Meanwhile, back on Elm Street, the Williams house sat in stunned silence. Martha had cleared the dinner dishes with shaking hands, unable to look at the Christmas tree or the festive decorations that now seemed to mock the devastation of their family. Richard sat in his recliner, staring at the wall, trying to understand how he had gotten everything so wrong. How had he spent years criticizing a son who was working 2 jobs to help his family? How had he held up as a role model, a son who was stealing and lying? William had retreated to his childhood bedroom, finally forced to confront the web of deception he'd woven. The money he'd stolen wasn't just money, it was his brother's love, his brother's sacrifice, his brother's attempt to prove his worth. 2 parents who couldn't see past their own expectations. Martha knocked softly on Daniel's old bedroom door and stepped inside. The room still held traces of the boy Daniel had been: a few trophies from high school baseball, some old books, a guitar he'd taught himself to play. "I keep thinking about all the times we criticized him," she said to Richard when she came back downstairs. "All the times we made him feel like he wasn't good enough. And all the time he was trying to take care of us," Richard replied, his voice heavy with regret. "Working himself to the bone to send us money we never even knew we needed." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their mistakes settling over them like a heavy blanket. "What kind of parents are we?" Martha asked finally. "What kind of parents favor one child over another, especially when we had it all backwards?" Richard didn't have an answer, but he knew that sitting in silence wasn't going to fix what they had broken. They had spent years damaging their relationship with Daniel through comparisons and criticism. It was going to take more than one evening of regret to repair that kind of hurt. The question was, would Daniel even give them the chance to try? 3 days passed before Daniel returned to work. 3 days of walking around his small apartment, staring at the phone, trying to decide how to feel about everything that had been revealed on Christmas night. His parents had called several times, but Daniel wasn't ready to talk yet. The hurt went too deep, and the betrayal was too fresh. Not just William's betrayal, but the realization that his parents had never really seen him for who he was. When he finally went back to his construction job, his foreman, a gruff man named Tommy, who'd been in the business for 30 years, noticed something different about Daniel. "You look like somebody ran over your dog," Tommy said during their lunch break. "Everything okay at home?" Daniel had never talked much about his personal life at work, but something about Tommy's straightforward manner made him open up. He told Tommy about the family dinner, about the money, about years of being compared unfavorably to a brother who turned out to be a fraud. Tommy listened without judgment, nodding occasionally and chewing his sandwich. When Daniel finished, Tommy was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think?" Tommy said finally. "I think your parents are going to have to do some serious soul-searching, and your brother's going to have to face some hard truths. But the question is, what are you going to do?" "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. "I mean, you got a choice to make. You can stay angry and hurt, and Lord knows, you got every right to be. Or you can decide what kind of man you want to be when this is all over." Tommy stood up and brushed crumbs off his work shirt. "I've seen a lot of families torn apart by things like this. Some of them never heal, but the ones that do heal, they do it because somebody in the family decides to be bigger than their hurt." Meanwhile, across town, Richard and Martha were doing exactly the kind of soul-searching Tommy had predicted. They had spent the past 3 days talking, crying, and trying to understand how they had gone so wrong as parents. "We have to go to him," Martha said on the third evening. "We have to tell him how sorry we are." "Sorry doesn't seem like enough," Richard replied. "How do you apologize for years of making your son feel like he's not good enough?" "You start with the truth," Martha said. "You start by admitting you were wrong, completely and totally wrong, and then you spend whatever time it takes to earn back his trust." Richard nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing, but hearing it from Martha made it real. They had to go to Daniel, not to make themselves feel better, but to begin the long process of healing their family. The question was, would their younger son be willing to listen? The knock on Daniel's apartment door came at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening. Daniel had just gotten home from his second job, and he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. When he opened the door and saw his parents standing there, looking older and more fragile than he remembered, his first instinct was to close it again. "Please," Martha said softly. "Please, let us come in. We need to talk to you." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let them enter his small studio apartment. It was the first time his parents had ever been to his place, and he saw them taking in the sparse furnishings, the second-hand furniture, the evidence of a young man living paycheck to paycheck. "Daniel," Richard began, his voice shaky, "we came to apologize." "Dad, I don't think an apology is going to—" "Not just apologize," Richard interrupted. "We came to tell you the truth about what kind of parents we've been, what kind of people we've been." Martha was already crying, but these were different tears than the ones she'd shed on Christmas night. These were tears of recognition, of finally seeing clearly. "We were wrong," she said. "Not just about the money, but about everything. About you, about William, about what success really means." Richard sat heavily in Daniel's only chair, looking like a man who'd aged years in just a few days. "Son, you've been the better man all along, and we were too blind to see it. You worked 2 jobs to help us," Martha continued. "You sacrificed your own comfort, your own future, to try to take care of us. And what did we do? We criticized you. We made you feel like you weren't enough." Daniel stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot, trying to process their words. Part of him wanted to forgive them immediately, to put the family back together. But another part of him was still angry, still hurt by years of feeling like he didn't measure up. "Why?" he asked finally, not turning around. "Why was it so easy for you to believe the worst about me and the best about William?" It was the hardest question they could have been asked, because it forced them to confront their own prejudices and assumptions. "Because we confused success with worth," Richard said quietly. "Because we thought having a college degree and a fancy job meant more than having character and a good heart. Because we were proud of William's achievements and embarrassed by your struggles," Martha added, her voice barely a whisper. "And that was wrong. That was so terribly wrong." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Martha's quiet crying and the distant hum of traffic outside. Daniel finally turned away from the window and looked at his parents. Really looked at them, for the first time since Christmas night. He saw the weight they were carrying, the genuine remorse in their eyes, the way his father's shoulders sagged with the burden of his mistakes. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" Daniel asked, his voice soft but steady. "It wasn't working 2 jobs. It wasn't being tired all the time, or having no social life. It was sitting at your dinner table every Sunday, listening to you talk about how proud you were of William, and wondering what I had to do to make you proud of me." Martha's hand went to her heart. "Oh, Daniel, I thought if I sent you money, if I helped with the bills, maybe you'd see that I was trying. Maybe you'd understand that I had value too, even if I didn't have William's fancy degree." You do have value, Richard said, his voice breaking. You have more value than we ever recognized. You're honest, hardworking, generous, loyal, everything a parent should want in a son. Then why did it take this long for you to see it? Daniel asked. Why did it take finding out about the money, finding out about William's lies, for you to realize I was worth something? It was a fair question, and a brutal one. Richard and Martha looked at each other, knowing that their answer would determine whether their family could ever truly heal. Because we're human, Martha said finally. Because we made assumptions, based on what looked successful from the outside. Because we measured our children against society's standards, instead of looking at their hearts. Because we failed you, Richard added. As parents, as people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, we failed you completely. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing their words, their admissions, their pain. What about William? Daniel asked. What happens with him? He's getting help, Martha said. He's looking for a real job, and he's promised to pay back every penny he took, even if it takes him years. And he knows that he's not welcome in our house until he makes this right, Richard added. Not just the money, but the lying, the stealing, the way he let us treat you badly while he lived off your generosity. Daniel walked over to his small kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, his hands trembling slightly. The apartment was so quiet, you could hear the refrigerator humming. I don't know how to forgive you, Daniel said finally, his words hanging in the air like a confession. I want to, but I don't know how to get past years of feeling like I wasn't enough for my own parents. Martha stood up and took a tentative step toward her son. Then let us show you, she said. Let us prove to you that we see you now, that we understand what we had all along. Let us earn your forgiveness, Richard added, standing beside his wife. However long it takes. For the first time since Christmas night, Daniel felt a tiny crack in the wall of hurt and anger he'd built around his heart. It wasn't healing yet, but it was the beginning of possibility. The healing didn't happen overnight. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't a light switch that gets turned on in a moment of emotion. It's a process, sometimes a long and difficult one, that requires patience, understanding, and genuine change from everyone involved. Over the next several months, Richard and Martha began the slow work of rebuilding their relationship with Daniel. They came to his apartment once a week, not to criticize or give advice, but simply to spend time with him. They asked about his work, his dreams, his life, without comparing him to anyone else. Richard started helping Daniel with small projects around his apartment, fixing a leaky faucet, painting the bathroom, assembling furniture. Working alongside his younger son, Richard began to see the skilled craftsman that Daniel had become. The way he could look at a problem and find a solution with his hands and his mind. Martha learned to cook some of Daniel's favorite meals and would bring them over on Sundays, replacing the tense family dinners of the past with quiet, comfortable visits where they could talk or just enjoy each other's company. Slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild trust. William, meanwhile, was facing the consequences of his actions. He had found a job at a local warehouse, earning a fraction of what he claimed to have made at his previous position. Every month, he sent half his paycheck to Daniel, working to repay the money he had stolen. It would take years to pay it all back, but it was a start. He had also written Daniel a letter, not asking for forgiveness, but acknowledging the full extent of his betrayal and expressing genuine remorse for the pain he had caused. I don't expect you to forgive me, the letter said. I don't even deserve the chance to ask. But I want you to know that I see now what you were doing, what you were sacrificing, and what I took away from our parents and from you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you've always been. Daniel read the letter several times, but didn't respond immediately. He needed time to process his feelings about his brother, just as he needed time to heal his relationship with his parents. The breakthrough came 6 months after that devastating Christmas dinner. Daniel was at his parents' house, helping his father repair some loose boards on the back deck, when Martha called them in for lunch. As they sat around the kitchen table, just the three of them, sharing sandwiches and conversation, Richard looked at his younger son with clear eyes. "You know what, Daniel?" Richard said. "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the man you are, the way you work, the way you've handled all of this with such grace. I should have told you that years ago." Daniel looked up from his sandwich, and for the first time in years, he saw something in his father's eyes that he had been waiting his whole life to see: genuine pride. Not based on comparisons or achievements, but based on who Daniel was as a person. "Thank you, Dad," Daniel said quietly. "That means everything to me." Martha reached across the table and squeezed both their hands. "We're going to be okay," she said. "Our family is going to be okay." And in that moment, Daniel felt the last wall around his heart begin to crumble. Not because the hurt disappeared instantly, but because he could see that his parents were genuinely different people than they had been 6 months ago. They had done the hard work of examining their own hearts and changing their perspective. "I forgive you," Daniel said, the words coming out stronger than he expected, "both of you. I forgive you." The tears that followed were healing tears, cleansing tears. Tears that washed away years of resentment and disappointment and replaced them with hope for the future. 1 year later, the Williams family gathered for Christmas dinner again. The scene looked similar to the previous year: the same dining room, the same Christmas tree, the same smell of ham and fresh-baked rolls filling the house. But everything was different. Daniel sat at the table, relaxed and confident, no longer bracing himself for criticism or comparisons. He had been promoted to supervisor at the construction company and had started taking night classes in business management, not because his parents expected it, but because he wanted to continue growing and learning. William was there too, quieter than he used to be, but genuinely present in a way he had never been before. He had paid back half of the money he owed Daniel and was working steadily to pay back the rest. More importantly, he had learned to find his worth in his actions rather than in the facade he presented to the world. Richard and Martha had become different parents, the kind who celebrated their children's character rather than their achievements, who offered support instead of criticism, who had learned that love isn't about molding your children into what you think they should be, but about appreciating who they are. "You know what, I'm grateful for this Christmas," Martha said as they sat around the table. "I'm grateful that we learned it's never too late to become the family we were meant to be. I'm grateful for second chances," Richard added, looking at both his sons, "and 4 sons who were big enough to give them to us." Daniel smiled, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. "I'm grateful for forgiveness," he said, "for the chance to heal, and for learning that families can come back from even the worst mistakes." William nodded, his voice humble when he spoke. "I'm grateful for brothers who worked 2 jobs to help their families, and for parents who taught me that it's never too late to become a better man." As they held hands around the table for grace, each member of the Williams family understood something they hadn't known the year before: that real success isn't measured in degrees or job titles or bank accounts. Real success is measured in love and sacrifice, in the willingness to admit when you're wrong and work to make things right. The money Daniel had sent home for 3 years had finally reached its destination, not as currency, but as the foundation for a rebuilt family. Friends, as I bring this story to a close, I want you to think about the Williams family and the lessons their journey teaches us about parenting, about family, and about the dangerous trap of comparison. Richard and Martha Williams made a mistake that too many parents make. They measured their children against each other instead of appreciating each child's unique gifts and struggles. They confused success with worth, achievement with value, and in doing so, they nearly lost the son who loved them most. Daniel's story reminds us that the child who struggles may be the one making the greatest sacrifices. The child who doesn't fit our definition of success may be the one with the biggest heart. And the child we worry about most may be the one taking care of us in ways we never see. Parents, hear this. Every child has their own path, their own timeline, their own way of showing love and contributing to the family. When we compare our children to each other, we rob them of the confidence they need to become who they're meant to be. We teach them that love is conditional, that their worth depends on being better than someone else. But this story also teaches us about the incredible power of forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. Daniel could have walked away from his family forever after discovering William's betrayal and his parents' years of criticism. He had every right to stay angry, to cut ties, to protect himself from further hurt. Instead, he chose the harder path. He chose to forgive, not because his family deserved it, but because forgiveness freed him to love and be loved again. Richard and Martha could have defended their parenting, made excuses for their favoritism, or minimized their mistakes. Instead, they chose to face the truth about themselves, to change their hearts and their actions, and to do the hard work of earning back their son's trust. Even William, who had made the worst choices of all, found redemption through honesty, hard work, and genuine remorse for his actions. The Williams family discovered what every family needs to know, that love isn't about being perfect, it's about being real. It's about admitting when you're wrong, working to make things right, and choosing each other even when it's hard. If you're a parent watching this story, ask yourself, do I compare my children to each other? Do I have favorites, even if I try to hide it? Do I measure my children's worth by society's standards or by the content of their character? If you're an adult child who's felt overlooked or undervalued by your family, ask yourself, is there room in my heart for forgiveness? Is there a way to rebuild broken relationships if the other person is genuinely willing to change? And if you're someone who, like William, has made serious mistakes that hurt your family, ask yourself, am I willing to face the truth about my actions and do whatever it takes to make things right? Families are messy, complicated, imperfect groups of people trying to love each other despite their flaws. But when forgiveness flows, when pride gives way to humility, and when love becomes more important than being right, broken families can heal in ways that seem almost miraculous. The money Daniel sent home was never really about the money. It was about love, about wanting to contribute, about trying to prove his worth to people who should have seen it all along. And in the end, that love did reach its destination. It reached the hearts of parents who learned to see their son clearly, and it became the foundation for a family that chose healing over hurt. That's the message I want to leave you with today, friends. In your family, in your relationships, in your life, choose love over pride, forgiveness over resentment, and healing over hurt. Because families that choose to fight for each other, even after serious mistakes, can become stronger than they ever were before. Thank you for joining me for this story today. If it touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Remember, every family has the potential for redemption, and it's never too late to choose love. Until next time, this is James Lioncourts, reminding you that the strongest families are not the ones that never break, but the ones that choose to heal. God bless you and your families, and I'll see you in the next story.